in
lot.
silk, a China silk, which is a very lightweight, almost like air. And it just makes such a beautiful edge. It doesn't add any bulk. And in this case, the quilting was done with the cotton and then the China silk underneath. So this is just a serged edge.
So it wasn't pressed open. It looks like 5H.
That's exactly right, serged together. And then this is your Hong Kong finish here on the edges where the jacket might fly open and you want it to look particularly beautiful.
And I noticed you carried that through the hem.
Also into the hem, that's right. It keeps the hem from getting bulky with a turn under, but it also is very, yeah.
They're almost decorative.
That's exactly right.
Part
That's
of the
the
design.
way I like to think of them. And then this, in a sheer or lightweight cotton, if you have a serger, you can do a rolled edge seam. And I actually stitch the seam first at whatever size it's
5/8
required
or
to
half.
be. That's right. And then I set my machine to what's called the rolled edge, which creates this thread edge that just totally encases the seam, overcasts it. And when
and cuts the excess fabric.
Yes, that's right. It trims the excess fabric, overcasts it, and then it also, when you're piecing a lot of fabrics together, it gives you like an outline. It's like that outline that you see when you draw a sketch. And it just allows the fabrics to be separated in a decorative sort of way.
Well, and I noticed too how lightweight it is.
Oh,
you don't have any
absolutely.
bulky seams in this jacket.
Right. But the other thing it does is it beefs up the cotton a little bit. You know, it's not quite as droopy as it might be because you have these thread seams that are giving it a little bit of support.
Okay, you're going to show us now how to do a few of these techniques.
I am. So this is, of course, your regular 5/8 inch seam. And I've shown you two of the easiest seam finishes. This is a pinked edge. You use your pinking shears. This is a very old-fashioned way. And if you just run one little line of stitching down there, it kind of secures it.
It keeps it from raveling any farther.
That's exactly right. And then this is what we'd call a standard serged edge. This is what we call the industry standard, and it does look very clean and neat.
It does.
Yes. Then, in this case, this is a serged edge, but the seam has been serged together and pressed to one side. And if you wanted it to look like a faux flat felt, you would just top stitch it. Yes,
Yeah,
and
that
you
would
would
be
get
easy
the
to
look
do.
of a flat felt without having to do that wrap step that is so complicated and difficult.
Time consuming too.
Right. Now this is a rolled edge serge
Like you
finish.
showed on the
That's
jacket.
exactly right. Alone. And then here you see it with the seam being sewn and then the rolled edge over top of it.
This is actually what you
That's
did
exactly
on this.
right. That's exactly right. Yes. And then you can see how it looks when you open it out. It's just such a fun little decorative
Lace flat.
statement. That's right. So here in this one nice long seam, we have the step-by-step of a French seam. And a French seam is also a very old-fashioned seam and very beautiful, and particularly beautiful on shears, like organza or something like that.
Because you don't want to be able to see.
Because you don't want to see the seam at all. So you start by making your regular seam, and in this case it was about 1/2 inch. And then you trim it down very small to about 1/8 or 1/4, depending on how ravelly the fabric is. And then you go to your iron and you press it to one side pretty securely. And then you go to the machine and you actually, on the flip side, encase that seam with another row of stitching.
Oh, you're just closing the whole
That's
seam.
exactly right. So the first, you can't really tell on this linen because it looks the same front or back, but this is actually the front of the fabric. The first seam is on the front. You trim it, and then you flip it to the back and put that second line of stitching, and this is what you end up with, and it's really a beautiful seam.
And like you say, especially if you don't want anything to show.
That's exactly right. Yes. A Hong Kong finish you make, and this I've done some straight ones and some curved ones. The first thing you do is you stitch on this bias strip, and you stitch it around. Then you trim it cleanly, flip it around, top stitch, and then if you want it to actually be bound instead of Hong Kong, you would just fold that underneath. That's exactly right.
Which is what you've done here.
That's right.
Otherwise, you just trim this off.
Yes. Right. And here is the same on a straight. This is not a bias piece because it's a straight line. You don't have to do the bias. So you pin that on. I have a little sample here of how you'd start. You pin that strip onto the fabric, and then you'd stitch, and then you press it and turn it. It's really important on these special seam finishes to use your iron as your friend and press so that it lays really nice and flat. The last thing you want on the inside of a garment is a lumpy seam.
And when you've worked so hard on
That's
such a beautiful
exactly
fabric.
Right. So here you see a sample of a Hong Kong finish seam on an open seam, which is really just so pretty. And then I also made you some samples because you can buy this bias tape that's already made. If you're afraid to cut your, the bias strips, or you're not, you don't have a fabric you love, you can buy a cotton bias, and then you can, again, you just
encase it.
You just put it on and then trim it and then encase it. And it's a little, you get a very small edge there, but you do get a pretty edge. And then here I did a little sample of a flat film.
Oh,
using
I like
the
flat
bias
fell seam.
tape.
I just think it's such a pretty finish. Okay.
Yes.
Well, it's really nice to know that we have so many options when we're sewing.
Right.
And it's fun to experiment with different types of seam finishes. Thank you very much,
Oh,
Ray.
my pleasure.
Ray, thank you so much for being here today. I don't know if it's, a wedding dress or maybe a cocktail dress that we only wore one time or what, but we probably all have in our closet something that's just hanging there. And what inspired you to start changing these garments or recycling them, I guess you could say?
I just think when you have beautiful fabric or beautiful lace, often in a special occasion garment, you have these beautiful details that you don't want to get lost. And it's so fun to take them and turn them into a new thing that you can use or someone else can use. And you have that sense of the continuation of the garment living again. And of course, now that we're living greener, it's very fashionable to repurpose garments.
And I mentioned a wedding dress, and what we're going to show is actually made from this particular wedding dress, which was a beautiful garment.
That's right, but it's not a fashion that anybody would wear now. It was very high-necked, and actually the lace was fairly soiled. I had to wash the lace, before I worked on the dress. But
And
that beautiful border
pieces
at the bottom of the dress, of the original dress, I just thought would be so pretty on the bottom of the christening dress.
I see.
So
we don't want to waste anything, do we?
No, that's exactly right. So what you have to do is assess, as you plan this kind of project, you have to think about how much fabric you have and if you have enough to do the project.
Sure.
So of course, from a wedding gown to a christening dress, you can pretty much usually get it. You just have to be careful about how you fit the details in.
And finding a pattern
That's exactly
to start
right.
with is
That's
very
exactly
important.
right. So these sleeves are the sleeves that were on the wedding gown, the top of the sleeve. And then the back of the dress is actually the sleeves, the bottom of the sleeves. They had this beautiful lace on them, and they had the buttons and the loops.
So you used all those
little
little
buttons. So I was
buttons.
just able to reuse that. This little bow was on the front. And then the skirt was just cut straight off the skirt of the wedding gown. I pressed it.
Did you have to line it, or was it already lined?
I lined it with cotton. Actually, always good on a on any dress that you're making new to fit it before you start cutting up the old beautiful dress. So I made the bodice of the garment and fitted it on the little child that would wear the dress. And then that is what I normally would have just put that right inside, but because I wanted to show it to you, I made an extra. So the inside is all
really,
cotton.
This was the part that needed to fit. This
That's exactly
was basically
right.
length.
The skirt is just length and fluff. Beautiful fluff.
Oh, what a wonderful way to
That's exactly
to
right.
keep that memory of the wedding, but in a christening gown as well.
Right. That's exactly right. And while this isn't, the fabrication is not perfect, and there's some spots and soil, I just don't think anybody notices that when it's a beautiful heirloom that you're changing into another heirloom. Oh, I wanted to show you one more thing. You can always, when you do this, put a little information about the garment inside. So I actually made a little
The date.
a little date of the christened children. And as more children are christened, those can be
You could
added
add
onto
to
the
it.
inside. You could also have put the name of the person who wore the dress and the date it was
Start
worn
with-
the first time. That's right.
That's a great idea.
So keeping a little record in the dress is
And I
always
know they
fun.
do quilt labels on quilts, but I had not ever
Yes.
thought about doing
Yes,
that.
in a christening dress particularly.
Okay, so next we're going to show a vest that
That's exactly right. This
you
was
just
a
never
vest
wore
that
anymore.
I had and wore a lot and then stopped wearing. It wasn't quite the fashion anymore, but I loved this fabulous reversible paisley
Oh.
that the vest was made out of.
That
So-
was this part.
Yes. So I took apart the vest and then started playing on my dress form with how I wanted to use it. And these seams actually here on the dress, on the jacket, were the seams at the bottom of the little mitered corners at the bottom of the vest. So
Oh,
I
it's
almost
kinda hard to
twisted it
see, but
completely
it's-
around.
Right
Yes.
here. I see.
Right.
And those are the ones on the collar.
That's
I
exactly
see.
right. And sometimes you have to add in a new fabric. So this is a new fabric, this tweed, but it looks really pretty
Oh.
with the paisley. You always
So you just
texture
took the paisley to the
texture.
fabric shop and
That's exactly right. I took
uh-huh.
the paisley to the fabric
This
shop.
goes great.
That's right. And then in this case, because the paisley was reversible, I wanted the jacket to be reversible too. So the inside is actually of 3-ply silk, beautiful crepe. So it makes it a little dressier, but I left all the paisley still raw so everyone could see it. So this
That
is
took
the,
some thinking ahead of
that's
time
exactly
to engineer
right.
that.
You do have to think about it. But here's the reverse side, and it's a little dressier version of the same jacket. So when you're traveling or whatever, it's a good, it just looks a little different.
Wow. If you had a spot on one side, you can just reverse
That's exactly right. And so
What a
now
great-
I have my paisley back. I can enjoy it, wear it again and again and again. And who knows, when this goes out of fashion, maybe I'll make something new out of it.
Reuse it.
That's
well,
right.
and you had an article in the, let's see, it was
Threads.
the Threads magazine that showed this dress that
Right, this vintage little
wasn't-
suit, women's suit. And again, I took it apart, used the pieces that I could, and added a new black
I
piece
love
to
the,
make the
the
top.
solid.
Yes, yes, and then just reworked it. It's good to make sure that the vintage fabric is sturdy. Give it a little stretch test and make sure it's not rotten. It's not gonna.
Right.
And sometimes it's good to have it cleaned or wash it
Before you start
so
designing.
that you know that you're making something that's going to last another 20 years or 30
Those are
years.
great ideas.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate learning all this. Alicia, thank you so much for coming. And one thing I've always learned from you when you come is that you can put grapefruit with lots of different ingredients, can't you?
Yes, thank you so much for having me. And I love to come and bring new, unique things you can use Texas grapefruit for. So today I wanted to show you a different kind of way to use grapefruit with a really unique ingredient. It's called quinoa.
Quinoa.
Yeah, and
That's what
that's
this
what this
is.
is
You're
right
s-
here. Yeah, it's a grain that is so healthy. It's a great source of protein. It's actually an ancient grain from long, long ago. It's actually, I think, the first one that they first started using. So, yeah, and we're going to make a recipe today. It's called Rio Star grapefruit and quinoa salad.
It's a salad,
Yeah,
okay?
it's a salad, cold salad. So first I'd like to start by sectioning a grapefruit or showing you how. You want to cut off each end of the grapefruit. And I've probably showed this a few times, many times over my years of working with grapefruit, but it's something people don't, they think it's more difficult than it actually is. And so I like to show just how very simple it is. You're just taking a knife and cutting that peel off. Now you want to get all of the white membrane off because that part